Matthew Hemming. Matt manages the 5D cost planning team at Mitchell Brandtman Quantity Surveyors. That puts him right amongst the digital transformation and the increased project certainty it offers. Now, we're all too familiar with the old kind of project certainties, but they're almost certain to take longer and cost more than we planned. Let's hear from Matt about the model project and his much more appealing kind of certainty. Matt?
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Warren. So, has everyone had a good decade? Yeah? I think it's fair to say that it's certainly been a disruptive one. I was thinking the other day that even the word disrupt has been disrupted recently. So when I was going through school, I'm pretty sure I used to get into a fair bit of trouble for being disruptive in class. But now it's a positive thing. And I actually believe in the positive side of disruption. I think us as humans, we need to be disrupted because otherwise we get really comfortable. We get comfortable in doing what we know. We get complacent about expecting the same results. In the last decade or so, we've really seen technology. We've really seen technology progress. It's grown exponentially. Now, technology's really touched every aspect of our lives, basically from when we wake up to when we go to bed. But ultimately, technology is positive. Now, the technology is put in place to make us smarter, faster, greener, leaner, meaner, cleaner, all of those things. It's meant to make our lives a lot more simple, predictable, and more certain. So in the last decade or so, we've seen 3D technology in our industry really progress. And it's really taken a hold of how we view projects and how we interact with people and developments. So with 3D design, we've also seen very rapid growth of other software and other technologies that are reliant on 3D and that support 3D. But what we also have seen is BIM. BIM has really emerged in the last sort of decade and a half. But BIM itself it's created a little bit of confusion as we've gone through. So I'm sure most of you would have heard of the term BIM or Building Information Modeling. Yeah? If we just look at that just for a minute, and I'm not going to do a presentation on BIM because that's a whole hour-long session in itself, but I'm really interested, just the people in the room. I mean, who has done a BIM project? Just hands up. There's a couple of people, and that's like a full BIM project, whatever full BIM might actually mean. Now, on the other side of that, who's done a project where there's been a 3D model? Just any kind of 3D model. So there's a lot more of you, and I would expect that. The experience within our office is very much the same as well. And what I did was had a look back at the last couple of hundred 5D roles that we've done, or 5D projects that we've done, which is basically where we're leveraging 3D information to really push the boundaries of what we do as quantity surveyors in providing outcomes in time and cost. And less than 5% of those have been BIM projects. So it just kind of shows the potential that can come from the humble 3D model. And that's really what I want to start to break down today is when we look at BIM, we need to really understand that it's coming off a very, very solid 3D foundation. That 3D design foundation has been evolving for 30 or 40 years. I think it was the 80s when it first started to come about within our industry. The 3D information is what we really want. That's what can be leveraged. That's what this is all about. It's about leveraging that technology. 3D is the gold of what we need to really start to push and break down traditional boundaries. Traditional boundaries that are constrained by the time it takes to actually perform a task. And myself as a quantity surveyor, and I've been a quantity surveyor for the last decade and a half, I grew up using scale rules and things like that, and it takes a long time to complete something in a traditional way. And by the time you've completed it, it's basically outdated. And that's where this shift is now happening. We can start to get live information that's actually evolving when designs are evolving. We can provide better certainty and clarity around some of those cost and time outcomes. So as an industry, we've really grown to accept a few things, and it's a bit of a shame ultimately, but we're really constrained by, I guess, what we had to work with in the past. When we look at cost risks, things like tender uncertainty. When we're going to tender on a project, it's a very important milestone. It's a critical milestone. It's really going to be the make or break of a job. But we decide to auction it. We decide to basically go to the market and say, how much should I pay for this project? To me, that doesn't provide any certainty at all. No matter about all the hard work that could have been done prior to that, we're basically leaving it to the market to decide. Imagine a world where you weren't faced with tender swings of over 20%. And we definitely see that, and that's definitely an uncertain situation. We can start to change these things with using 3D design. We can start to visualize. We can communicate a different way. We can create a platform that allows us to engage with contractors, subcontractors, and just the project itself in a very different way, in a more predictable way. And that's an important shift to start to break down some of these things that we've come to expect and accept. Rules of thumb, they're another one. So we really rely on a lot of rules of thumb within our industry. Contingency. It's always 10% or 5%, it seems. And in a lot of cases, I don't think that actually reflects the risk profile of some of these jobs. You might want to de-risk a project. You might spend a lot of time and effort de-risking a project, yet you go through to a funder and the funder will want to see 5% in there. Now, 5% is a lot when it comes down to a project, and I'm sure there are some contractors out there that would love to be achieving a 5% margin on jobs, because we know that that is a pretty competitive space. So these are the types of things that we should be able to manage better. And we can start to manage better now that we've got tools and technology to help us do it. Variations are also very uncertain. Variations are not necessarily uncertain in what they're about and how they come about. In a lot of cases, it's more the pricing of those. And as a quantity surveyor, again, I mean, we get into a lot of adversarial discussions, particularly with contractors and subcontractors, about what the price should be for something. There should only be one price for it though, and that price should be known, and that price should be known up front. If everybody's working towards that same goal, we should be able to limit a lot of that, the arguments that happen, that adversarial situation. When we can start to create trust around the information that we're dealing with, things like quantity and rates shouldn't become an issue. They should be known, they should be trusted, and they should be locked away and used when they're needed, not a discussion point every single time that there is a change. And again, the technology that's around now can allow this to happen, in a more streamlined way, in a more trusted way, and a visual way. Now, time is the same. So every project faces program challenges. And a lot of that stems from, when you look at, again, tender time. I don't envy a contractor's position when they win a tender. And we hear all too often that discussion of, yeah, great, I won that job, I wonder what I missed to win that. That is a terrible place to start for any project. It really is. We want to create a bit more certainty around things like time, but it's very difficult to do when that initial contract program is probably put together 2 days before a tender goes in. Similarly with the price. And their initial challenge is, well, now we've got to build this thing and we've got to meet this program that may or may not reflect what the reality is going to be and also the cost of that. Again, leaving it up to the market. So being able to utilise the data that comes out of these models, being able to leverage that information and drive better outcomes is going to provide a lot more certainty around things like time and program. S-curves are another one. It's all linked with time and cost. Cash flow is an important thing, but I've been involved in a fair few projects in my time, and I don't think there has been one that has followed that standard S-curve. It's probably a backwards S for you guys, but the message is that there's got to be a better way to manage that, to proactively manage that, and there is now. So the way that the humble 3D design model can help with all of this is not about just the visual aspect of it, and that is a very important part of what modelling is about. It's what has really given it traction in what we do. We live in a 3D world, yet traditionally, we'd have to visualise everything from 2D information. And 2D information, as impressive as it can be, it's actually dumb data. You can't do much else with it apart from interpret it yourself. So you're losing a lot of that knowledge and a lot of that continuity in what needs to happen, and people's interpretations become quite different. But 3D models contain a lot of data. Inherently, they contain a lot of data. And geometry. Geometry is what we're interested in as quantity surveyors, because that is quantity. And I might be a bit biased on this next point, but ultimately, quantity is king. Quantity leads cost and time. You can't develop a program without quantities. You can't create a budget without quantities. Now, once you can start to dynamically link those quantities and basically eliminate that tedious task of measuring and remeasuring and updating and all of those things, then you can start to really get something that can be proactively managed. It's live information. It's a huge shift in our industry, and it's something that has only just started to happen in the last probably half a decade, and it's really, really starting to take off. So there's a bit of an image up on these slides here. Now, again, this is not from a BIM project, this model. This is just a typical design model. Now, if you went to most reputable design firms, you would find that most of them have embraced or put in place some form of 3D platform, 3D design platform. Now, you might not get to see any of this 3D information all the time, because what you might be asking for is 2D documents. But what you don't know is that 2D information is actually coming from a 3D model. So seek out that model, because once you've got that model, you can do a lot of things with it. You can see around this model here, there's a number of different terms that you may or may not be familiar with. These are things that we can easily do from a model these days. Industry can start to create living cost plans that actually evolve with the design. We can do virtual trade packages, which is about creating a different way of engaging with contractors and subcontractors, giving them the ability to be able to understand the project, understand what they're pricing, know where that item is, that bit of material is, so that they can actually use a better rate for that, rather than trying to cover a bit of risk with the blanket rate that they would typically use. When you start to overlay time with that, which is the 4D side, then you can start to create a virtual cash flow. And once you've got a virtual cash flow, these things can be done before you're out on site, before construction starts. You can start to proactively manage. You can do options about how might be a better way to develop that project, to deliver that build, and what effect that might have on time and cost. So I'll show you a little bit of this in action. What's up on screen at the moment is basically a snapshot of 5D cost planning. We've got a model. That model has been broken down into the views of just the petitions. This is just an example of a petitions trade package. Taking off petitions on a project like that, it's a twin tower project there. it would be a couple of week exercise. When we're starting to link to models, it becomes very rapid. It's almost an automated process to be able to link from the model back to what you're seeing here, which is Costex software. The power really isn't in the time saving though. The power is in being able to interrogate that information, being able to understand that information. And for us, the biggest shift is for us to be able to share that information in a way that people can understand. No longer are we the quantity surveyors that might hide in a dark room and work our magic and come out with this answer that nobody really understands. We can now start to share this and we can interpret it in a different way. We can get people, we can start a conversation, get people around the model to start talking about potential ways of saving money, saving time, creating more value in this project. So we can also start to track changes. What we're looking at here is, in this instance, this client wanted to understand if we added a few more levels to this building, what would the impact be? What would the impact be on this particular trade package? So we can start to overlay two different revisions of a design. We can start to visually understand where the differences are, and you'll see some blue and red colours come up in a minute, which is basically looking at the differences between the two. We can then quickly understand what we're up against, and when we're starting to look at options and trying to add value or maximise value in a project, we can understand where the costs are actually sitting. We can run reports, things like variance reports, to start to identify that. And all of these things are done very rapidly. This is the big shift. Normally in our world, we would be asked to come up with an estimate of how much this change might cost. But in a lot of cases, you overlook a lot of the little things because it'll probably cost you more in time to actually work it out than it would the actual saving. You can pick up every single dollar of saving now. Now, one of the other things as well, and it's normally a common question of, well, how much can you get out of a model? And particularly a model that hasn't followed a full BIM path, how much can you get out of that? Now, you can't get everything. One of my, things is, if it's modelled, you can manage it. But we're not at a point in industry yet where everything is modelled. And we might not ever get to that point. I don't know whether we need to model paint on walls, things like that. But ultimately, when we start to do the analysis and you look at it by how many quantities we can actually leverage from a model by cost, you can see that's pretty high. We're getting about 90 to 95% of those quantities by cost. Now, the opportunity sits in these items that we're still going back and we're doing supplementary 2D measurement for. So 2D measurement is still important. There's no software out there where you can press a button and say, give me all the quantities and all the answers in the world. You still need to apply some intelligence to this. You still need to follow a standard practice to be able to leverage this information. But you can see that we spend a bit of our time picking up literally 6% of the cost. But there's the opportunity. And those items that we're not picking up through 3D information it's things like skirting on floors, it's cornices up on between the ceilings and the walls. Now this animation here, and I'm sure you've probably all seen some kind of construction sequence like this. This is basically putting the 5D and adding time to that, being the 4D. So we've got time and cost simulated, linked by quantity, which is centric to both of them. The important thing and the important difference on this here is up in the top left. So we've got dollars ticking over as well. Now, this is basically the output of that. It's the visual output where we can pause, we can look at it, we can start to understand it month by month, day by day. But the data that sits behind that, what you can do with that in proactively managing a project is enormous. And it's something that an industry, we've never been able to achieve, but we can do it now. The technology is at a point where we can start to look at time and cost in a very, very different way. We can start to actually manage it, actively manage it, rather than reactively looking at why that problem occurred. Now this project itself, it was actually, it's completing next month. So we've been working on this one for probably a year and a half. And as you can see by the cash flows that are sitting up here, it wasn't the smoothest of projects. It ran into some trouble early on in the ground. Now, for us, it's an aged care project. For us, what we needed to do was find a way to be able to understand what that impact was going to be doing in the future. What that impact was going to be doing for the completion of this job, and how we can start to better manage that outcome and mitigate that outcome. So by looking at it in a 3D way, by linking to information, by using updated programs and applying that to cost and time, we can really start to understand the impact on things like the progress payments that are going to be made. This one was also challenging when it came down to assessing value of work complete on site, because things had shifted so far. Where the contractor thought things should be versus where things actually were very different. And at the start, it became a bit of a heated discussion about what that actual value should be. When we started to apply this and show them this, that discussion kind of went away. And we found ourselves actually preparing their claims for them based on data. Now that's got to be a lot more certain, because as soon as a claim hits a table from somebody, it opens up a very adversarial situation, potentially. And they're the things that we want to move away from. If people aren't defending, then you're going to get a better outcome. If everybody is always thinking that someone's trying to take advantage of them, then we're back to where we were 20 years ago. So taking this out on site, this is what's happening now, and we're starting to push this through on a lot of our projects. We do a lot of work with banks, and a lot of that work is their risk assessments and doing progress drawdowns. But again, it's one of those debates that we have. It becomes subjective about the value of work complete, because we don't have these detailed bills of quantities around anymore that we can use. What we need to do is find another way. The other way is using the data that's contained in these models. We can start to look at it and not have a debate about, is it 20% complete or is it 30% complete? We can say it's actually 28.8% complete, because that's what the data is suggesting. And we can have a discussion around that. It's visual. We can start to interrogate that from both sides and get some trust around it. Now, the next phase of all of this is doing things like using drones, particularly on civil projects, where they can start to do a lot of that analysis and site investigation for us by using photogrammetry. So again, that technology, drone technology, we just saw that last presentation. We might be flying out in a drone to the site soon, but ultimately, these things are developing so rapidly, and the key is to remain agile and remain open to all of these changes and find ways that you can actually change it for yourself. Now, there's a lot of opportunities that still sit out there, particularly in the 3D space. So MEP, or services models, we see some fantastic services models out there, but again, for us, we don't get to utilize them that much. And building services are one of those areas where, they can account for around about 30% of a project cost, yet they're always dealt with a square metre rate, or again, it's just up to the market to tell us what that price is. We can get to a point now where we can leverage that information. We just need a willingness from, the whole industry about how we're going to use it and why we're going to use it, because the technology is there. It's no different to quantifying concrete structure at the end of the day. And again, once it's modelled, you can really proactively manage it. Reinforcement is another opportunity. So reinforcement, again, is used by more of these rules of thumb. We've got kilogram per cubic metre rates that we apply to concrete volumes that in a lot of cases never get checked in the end. You might receive a claim if it's a little bit more than what everyone bargained for, but ultimately there's no certainty around if that claim will actually come about, or whether the value of that trade actually represents the value of work that they're undertaking. So these are some of the golden opportunities that we've got that we can actually start to embrace. The challenges are who pays to do that modelling. Ultimately, I think when we start to look at things like fees and the benefits that it can bring, there shouldn't really be that kind of discussion. I think the benefits completely outweigh anything like a fee. So the future really is here, right? You need to seek out those models, seek out design models. Most people will be doing a design model if they're doing documentation or designs for you. Look for people and surround yourself with people that understand how to push these models to their limits, understand how to leverage them and get the best out of it, to drive things that you might not have even thought were possible in the past. We can create more certainty now with these models. Trust is another way that we can start to collaborate and communicate. We can visualize the information. And most of all, it's time to change your own adventure. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We've got time for a quick question or two.
Good.
That all sounds great, but some of us here might be wondering about some of the practical aspects that need to be contend with if we want to go down this path. And I've a couple here I'd like to ask you about. Can 5D be done with any 3D model, or does it require a certain standard before you can add that extra dimension?
We are quite fortunate here in Australia. We've really matured when it comes to 3D, and a lot of our standards, they're world leading when it comes down to modelling. So if you're dealing with a design practice or engineers, then you will find if they've adopted a 3D platform, they would have some pretty clear standards in place at the moment. And really, it comes down to the model. You need to have some validation processes in place to be able to make sure you can trust the information that's coming from that. But ultimately, it doesn't need to be a BIM model. Any model you'll be able to get some information out of and leverage.
And how does 5D change the way we tender a project?
So again, tendering is that whole auction thing, and you're basically trying to catch people unaware with it, which is not a good place to start, because everyone then is trying to fight for their own way through. So the visual aspect of it and being able to understand and trust and interrogate information. So that's the key to it. Being able to provide, you can do virtual trade packages now. Basically issue out what you saw on the screen to subcontractors or contractors where they can understand the information, in as much detail as we do. So it basically eliminates the way that you would go into price trades, and you start to open a more collaborative approach. That's what it's about. So you don't start to fight around the trade costs. You start to look at better ways of doing things. You can visualize it. You can create that discussion.
That's excellent. Thank you, Matt.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you all.